Well, hi, everybody. Welcome to Lean Blog Interviews. My guest today is Mike Kaeding. He is the CEO of Norhart. They're a company that designs, builds, and rents apartments. They're transforming the way this is done by incorporating technologies and techniques, including Lean. That's why we're here today. They're techniques that me and the listeners, we all realize have revolutionized other industries. So they have seen improved quality and reduced cost of housing. And they're committed, additionally, when it comes to mission and purpose, to solving America's housing shortage and affordability crisis. And in doing so, they hope to improve the way we all live. So, Mike, thank you for being here. Welcome to the podcast. How are you?
Yeah, thanks for having me.
The mission that you and Norhart have, I mean, I mean this as a positive. Like, it's a high-reaching, ambitious mission that reminds me of the way Toyota talks about benefit to society and mobility. Is that coincidental? Like, thinking that sort of came to be from your side?
Yeah, so the vision to solve America's housing affordability crisis, that's something that evolved for us over time. And certainly we work with Toyota, we're inspired by them, but they didn't actually lead to that inspiration.
Mhm. So I'm sure that was maybe part of the connection. Then we'll get into this more deeply of why Toyota and TSSC would choose
Yeah,
to partner up with you in Norhart.
yeah. Yeah, it's fun, this passion to solve America's housing affordability crisis. Like, it's crazy. You look at the world out there, and so many different industries. And we were just talking healthcare before this, and there's the world of manufacturing. And everyone on this call, you guys are like my people, the
Yeah.
listeners here, the lean people. Like, you guys have revolutionized so many different spaces and made so many significant improvements in society. When we look at the world of construction, it's been mostly flatline. I
Mm.
mean, over the past 60 years, manufacturing has improved labor productivity by 760%, but construction's done only 10%. It's terrible. And so, for the most part, we're learning the lessons that your viewers have learned and applying it to the world of construction. It's
Yeah.
remarkable to see those kinds of results.
It seems like what you're describing is something that happens a lot in healthcare. People get really caught up on the way we've always done it. Hey, you don't
Yeah.
understand. This is the way we've always done it. Like, how do you, in your position as a CEO of a company, help challenge or encourage everybody to challenge the way we've always done it?
Yeah, our industry is very much rooted in that. It's my dad did it this way, my granddad did it this way,
Yeah.
my great granddad did it this way, and by golly, I'm doing it this way as well. There's like a rough and tumble, like
Mhm.
hardened kind of stereotypical person in the world of construction. And
Mhm.
that's a hard shell to break. And so what we did is we didn't work to break it. Instead, we looked to hire people that are willing to be different than the
Yeah.
norm. So a lot of our energy, at least initially, goes into finding the very best people.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, the world of construction, that sometimes means in certain positions that it's less experienced people, but are willing to invent and experiment and try
Yeah.
new stuff. They have the right personality, the mentality for that continuous improvement. So foundationally, it's getting the people right first, and then you can
Mhm.
inspire them to make the change. But I think it's really, really hard to try to take the wrong people and get them to
Yeah.
change. Because even if they nod and say, "Yeah, I'll do it," they're not giving you your
Yeah.
heart and your passion, your soul, which is really what's required to make it work.
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting to think about other companies where it's said that they don't want to hire people with previous industry experience. I think this might have been true at Southwest. It's this question of, like, Toyota when they started in Kentucky. Do they want to hire people who had previously worked at other automakers and had moved from other states? Or are they locating in a place where they can hire for, I don't know what you would call it, attitude, aptitude, willingness to learn, and then invest in those people? So let me turn it back to you, though, Mike, with you and Norhart. Like, tell us a little bit more about how you find and identify and select, and then how do you make sure you're maximizing the potential of those people that you've brought in?
Yeah. To take it one quick step back, my own history is that my dad passed away relatively young, and my parents started this business, and so I took over at a fairly young age. And I think looking back, that was sort of there's a blessing in that because I didn't know what I was doing, right? I didn't know the way things were supposed to be done,
Yeah,
which
right.
enabled us to start asking questions and changing things. I had
Mm,
no idea how hard those changes would be. And maybe now
yeah.
with my experience, I would say, yeah, I don't want to take that path.
Yeah.
But as far as finding the best people, one of the first things we did once we understood how critical that was is we ended up hiring on 14 recruiters. At the time, we were only a 100-person company. We hired 14 recruiters. Let that sink in.
Yeah.
That was a tremendous investment for where we're at that size. But it really became clear that in order to change this industry, we needed literally the best people. And when we say best, we really mean like flying people in from other states to come work in the
Wow.
week. We have one, give you some caliber, example of the caliber. We have one employee who Steve Jobs announces the iPhone in 2007. Steve Jobs walks off stage, and this employee follows that presentation on that same stage following Steve Jobs. It's that kind
Mm,
of caliber and energy of person that we look to find. So I think getting the right recruiting infrastructure in place. The next thing is recognizing that the best people don't apply for jobs.
mm,
They already have a job. And
yeah.
so our team then actually goes and identifies all the different companies that are competitors and who's working where, identify the best people, build relationships with those people over time, and then try to attract them in. And then there's a lot about building the right culture, right?
Yeah.
I think culture is fundamentally about hiring the right people, but beyond that, it's things like identifying and listing what your values, your purpose, your mission are. As a CEO, every Monday morning, I am there doing orientation with the new hires.
Yeah.
I do follow-up orientation. I do engagement meetings. I am very much involved in that world, so I can to shape that culture. Another interesting thing to mention here is the best people aren't necessarily the most experienced.
Yeah.
Depends on the position. Some positions you need that. But what we look at is for any particular employee, are they on the journey to become best in the world at their niche?
Mm,
Right? So that
wow.
doesn't mean to be there today, but they've got to have an amazing trajectory. They have to have incredible abilities and passion and drive and energy to fight to the level of becoming best in the world of what they do.
Mm,
So that gives you a flair for how
yeah.
we think about hiring.
And I mean, I imagine there's a lot of screening. Are there like assessments or things that people fill out? Or is it through
Yeah.
interviewing to find that fit, those mindsets, if you will? It's not going to be listed on someone's resume, right?
Yeah. Uh, yeah. And we're literally working to find the unicorns, and they're very few and far between. For 10,000 applications, we may only hire 100 people or less.
Wow. Wow.
So the recruiters do the first round screening, and so they're really looking at values, culture fit. There's some basic skills question that they do, an evaluation. Then, depending on the position, the managers may get involved at the next stage. But I think the one unique thing that we bring in that's a bit different is for many of the positions, not all, but many, will hire somebody on a trial basis. So you've already passed the basic screening, bring you on a trial basis, and then you work with the team for at least 2 weeks, and the team evaluates you and
Oh,
how they actually like working with you. And it's actually your coworkers that sit down at the end of the 2 weeks, they go through all the values, they go through your skills, go through your passion, say, do you line up? And what's amazing is when you built a team of A players, they don't want to deal with anyone less than an A player.
yeah.
And so they are very quick to say, nope, don't want them on the team, don't want them on the team. And our hiring rate out of those trial periods is fairly low. So
Mm,
that's how we really ensure that the people we get are incredible. And
wow.
then beyond just the hiring, we're very, very thoughtful on how we do the evaluation of who stays in the company long term.
Mm.
Because we don't always get the hiring right. And we got to be quick about letting people go that are not the right fit.
I mean, it seems like there's opportunity for different feedback loops there.
Yeah.
PDCA or PDSA cycles of thinking, okay, if that initial filter is letting people through who the team is rejecting for some reason, does it go, is there a loop back then to change some of the filtering along the way, or before we started recording, Mike and I were talking, a couple emails that I tried sending to Mike got blocked, right? So there's, not to, it's an awkward analogy, but there's the false positive of letting an email through when it's spam, or letting an employee through when the team's going to say no, not a fit. And then there's the false reject, right?
Yeah.
You don't always know. Like, I was able to tell you, oh, my emails got rejected, but back to that point of, it would be harder to know if the filter is blocking employees who would really be a good fit.
And it sure could be. The way I look at it, though, the amount of cost involved in hiring the wrong person is tremendous.
Yeah.
And not just in dollars, but in just wasted time and driving up new initiatives. And so I'd rather, as hard as it is to say, I'd rather make a mistake in not hiring the right person
Mhm.
than to make a mistake in hiring the wrong person.
Sure. Even with the ability to correct for a quote unquote bad fit hire after some period, after the initial 2 weeks, is that kind of an ongoing assessment that takes place if a supervisor or a manager or somebody detects, or does a team sort of at some point, if you will, pull the figurative and on cord to say, hey, there's
Yeah.
an issue?
It varies depending where
Yeah.
the source of, like, there's an issue here, it comes from. The team sometimes brings that up. Sometimes it's the managers. Um, the the bar that we use, we actually stole from Netflix, but I love it. It's called the
Yeah.
keeper test,
Uh-huh.
which is that if a particular employee were to leave, how hard would you fight to keep them? If
Mhm.
the answer is I would fight tooth and nail to keep them, awesome, they're the right person.
Yeah.
If it's anything less than that, it's not good enough. And so
Yeah.
for many companies, they know to get rid of the bad people. They know they want the best people. Many companies are okay with the average, and we're
Mhm.
just not. There's
Yeah.
nothing wrong with the average. There's many
Mhm.
great places to work. This is
Yeah.
not what we need to change this industry. And we're very upfront with that. Like, that's a whole chunk of our orientation is talking about that.
Yeah.
And I think to do that well, though, you have to support people well on the way out, right? A great severance, really respectful exit plan.
Sure.
A lot of
Sure.
time people actually get notice that we're going to let them go, so they have time to find a new job. That whole process as well. So
Yeah.
it's continuous evaluation in that regard,
Yeah.
with everyone. And occasionally every, few months or a year or so, I might come down and say, all right, guys, let's really think about this right now. Like, where is everyone on your team? Do you feel that they're where they need to be?
Yeah. And as you pointed out, this can all be done respectfully.
Yeah.
It's a great thing to hear when it comes back then to culture and the mindsets, and just not just what are we doing, but how are we treating people. It's good to hear
Yeah.
that piece
Well,
of it too.
what I fight to do, it doesn't always work out this way, but I've got quite a few cases it has. I want that person to be happier with us after firing them than beforehand. How
Mm.
could that even work, right? Well, a
Yeah.
few things, right? If you give them, in many cases, we can give people notice so they can find their own job. They get a severance, they get paid on top of all that. And then if we help them find a new job that's a better fit for them,
Mhm. Mhm.
they're actually happier, right? Because
Yeah.
our jobs are pretty demanding. We're trying to change the world. But if that's not your spirit, if that's not your energy, you just want a, 9 to 5 kind of basic run of the mill job.
Mhm.
Let's help you find that. And now you're going to be super happy in your new role. And you should be happy that we moved you to that position.
Yeah. Yeah. And so, tell us a little bit about the growth. You mentioned 100 employees. You're at how many employees today?
Ballpark of around 250.
Okay. Yeah. So and there's a lot of growth in the future, I'm sure.
Yeah, we've
Projected
been
growth. Like, and then there's this question of how do you forecast that, or how do you plan for that, or hire? Imagine there's this process. We come back and talk about the business a little bit at Norhart. Are these projects known well enough in advance? Like, if you win a project, you can then hire accordingly. How do you find that balance of supply of talent and your demand or need for talent?
Yeah, so we're trying to solve for housing affordability, and that makes you redesign the system in so many different ways. And one example, one of the volatilities you mentioned was a demand for people to build a building for them. Okay, that causes headache in the hiring process. It causes extra waste in the fact we have to have capital to handle the, like, time off that people have to have as a result of not having a job. So what do we do to solve that? we build the buildings for ourselves.
Mm.
So we can have that very consistent pipeline because when we're renting out to residents, that demand is way, way, way more consistent than
Mm.
the demand of developers wanting us to build a building.
So instead of working with a developer, I mean, there's still a process, imagine, of you're working with cities, the project has to be approved more so than
Yeah.
winning the business, I guess, is a difference between you and other builders.
Yeah, it's a similar process in that regard. We have a team that sources and finds new sites and then work on the design of that site. They go through the city council, planning commission, the entitlements of that project, and then work to get approval on that. That then becomes an approved project that hops in our pipeline for the team to just consistently flow from one project to the next.
There's a word you probably don't hear a lot in construction there, flow.
Yeah, yeah.
Big
It's
oper
it's it's so true. I mean, I see trades all the time. They come in and be like, "Dude, I want an entire floor cleared out so I can just work on this floor, come in and then leave," right? There's no flow there. It's an up and down and back and forth. And so yeah, we've definitely applied lean techniques. We take the building, break it into small chunks, and then each team is moving through the building every 5 hours right now, between units. And so if you're an electrician, you're just wiring one unit to the next, to the next, to the next, a very consistent flow. Now, I will say it's really hard to do that, and we're
Yeah.
dealing with the mud and the pain of that right now. But our dream is to drop that down to an hour or even 30 minutes, where a
Mhm.
new apartment unit's produced that quickly.
Yeah. So there's this question, I imagine, then of, I mean, this is really getting into the details of work design and work balancing and flow of like, what's the cycle time of different jobs,
Yeah,
of who's doing what? And then you've touched on this idea of, well, how do we eliminate waste? Like, I know you're not trying to say like, hey, just do it faster. You're
yep.
eliminating waste and balancing these different trades and these different jobs and specialties to create flow. Is that what you said something here was really difficult? Is that the
Yeah.
difficult thing to get it to flow, right?
Yeah, yeah, well, and yeah, because you gotta get everything working in sync, and if any one thing gets out of sync, this is true with any lean process, it can create havoc on everything else,
Yeah.
especially when everything that becomes more and more tightly coupled as that chain gets tighter and tighter of what you're doing. There's cases you can add buffer and stuff between different, a
Yeah.
jobs, but eliminating that buffer actually helps improve the productivity of the site.
Mm.
Um, so yeah, our entire building is broken down into about 120 different tasks,
Oh.
everything from the dirt all the way to handing off as a key. And then every one of those tasks are being done every 5 hours for the most part.
Mhm.
There's some things that are off batch still that we're working on. Another really big, interesting challenge, this is true again with any lean process, is just material flow,
Mm.
right? Delivering, I mean, think about how big an apartment building is. This isn't just a product anymore. This is just tons and tons and tons of materials that now have to be delivered to the right person at every 5 hours in just the
Yeah.
right amount, not too much, not too little. And so that's another huge problem that we're working on right now. And part of the solution is we've started expanding all the way down that supply chain, even into
Mm.
becoming our own manufacturers in some cases.
Wow. And then there's this question of, so you're working with Toyota and TSSC has been helping you. You mentioned buffers, right? Not, there's this, I think, pragmatic Toyota view of maintaining flow, finding the right balance of, just in time inventory. Like an occasional stoppage creates tension to improve, where a lot of organizations would want to just buffer everything to where there's never a stoppage. How do they help you think through materials? I'm sure when you've got long lead times or questions about availability, help us understand the thinking where just in time doesn't mean like in a dogmatic way, zero inventory.
Yeah, it was one of my first questions when we met with Toyota. I said, "Dude,
Mm.
you guys just in time inventory, so you don't have any inventory, right?" Like, how did you this was during the chip shortage with their vehicles, and I
Right.
said, "How are you dealing with the chip shortage then?" I said, "Mike, just in time doesn't mean no inventory.
Yeah. Right.
It means being really thoughtful with that design." And so when we started looking at, before this even happened, our different supply chains, the chips were one of those points of risk of failure. And so
Right.
we identified that. and therefore we actually built up a stockpile to handle the fact that that was a key failure point in our system. And
Right.
so they didn't have as big of an impact, at least at that time, with the chip shortage. And that really opened my eyes. And so, yeah, for us, like we will buy container loads of materials out of other countries like China. The best that they can get me is maybe a plus or minus several week
Yeah. Right.
window of when it's going to show up. But I now have to transfer that, and it's a huge sum of materials into every 5 hours. And so that's one of the key things we're working on is okay, we take the materials, deliver it to the site. And the idea right now is that there's this area on site where we've got the materials built up, a small inventory, and then there's a team that takes inventory out of those container loads and kits them, and then delivers it into the factory every 5 hours. So they're
Wow.
smoothing out that flow.
And when you say factory, I mean, is some of the is there is this to some degree modular where you're pre-assembling and then going and installing on site, or are you referring to the construction site as quote unquote factory?
We're doing both.
Okay.
So the precast concrete, so giant beams and columns and stuff, are all poured and cast off site and delivered. Wall panels now are done in a little factory that takes coils of steel in one end and produces completed exterior wall panels out the other, and they drop them in place on site like Lego bricks. And so
Hmm.
I see more of it heading that direction where it's done a little bit more off site. The
Mhm.
kitting, for example, right now is all done on site, but I've got a feeling that eventually we're going to have almost a warehouse kind of
Mhm.
distribution area
Yeah.
that takes the large loads in one end and sends out the kits out the other. Just because the physical space to do that on site is very limited.
Yeah. Well, and that's where, I mean, you use the word thoughtful. I think in my experience and what I've learned, it's really more about a thoughtful approach as opposed to something that's dogmatic of
Yeah.
always this or never that, or like, the world is complicated. There's gray area, and there's the dynamics where your business is very different than Toyota's, and you've got this question of how to adapt to your business. And I do want to point people, I should have mentioned up front, Mike was previously a guest on the My Favorite Mistake podcast, and in that episode, I don't think we need to repeat all of that here. About what's different about Norhart and some of the model, and maybe you can touch on that as we talk more of the lean stuff, if that's okay with you, Mike.
Yeah.
But the question I usually ask people right up front, we got into some details here. What's your lean or TPS origin story? Like you, Mike, and then you meaning Norhart. Maybe that lines up one and the same.
Yeah. So I think in some ways we were thinking lean before I knew what lean was.
Mhm.
Growing up, my dad and my parents started the business. It was really scrappy, right? We were just kind of figuring things out on our own, like experimenting, trying new ways to do things. But that helped lower costs during that time. And then as you grow, the scrappy methodology doesn't work very well, and you got to apply new techniques, right? And learn
Yeah.
as you go. But I think kind of my dad passing and me taking over, not knowing what I'm doing, was again partly I didn't know it at the time, but lean thinking, like how do we just solve the problems in front of us to be
Yeah.
as efficient as possible? Um, but what really kicked off lean for me in a more meaningful way was I was speaking at a conference, and the head of TSSC happened to be there,
Mm.
and we ended up connecting and talking, and he said, dude, like we've been wanting to spread lean
Mm.
in the rest of the world in different areas, and specifically they were looking to do it in the world of construction. And so we just hit it off, and they ended up coming out here working with us. We've been out there a number of times as well, and it's been a really great partnership because I think there's a lot of principles of lean that you can read and learn from a book. There's
Mhm.
something deeper about like sitting beside someone looking at the same kind of problem and watching them think it through that
Mhm.
I've learned
Yeah.
so much from working with them.
And then how much of their style is them helping you and your company think things through? Like I've seen videos where they go into hospitals and the hospital people say, they didn't fix it for us. They taught us how to improve it. Like when they worked with a soup kitchen, that like there's this common theme. So this is a leading question. I shouldn't ask a question I think I know the answer to, but tell us about how like they work with you to teach you as opposed to fixing you.
Yeah, they certainly don't come in and just fix the issues, because what they find, and this is, I could totally see it, is then they leave and everything reverts back to the old way, right? Nothing
Right.
really changes. And so you're working on culture change, not just a tool or technique. And that's one thing they've really hounded in me, is it has nothing to do with the tools, right?
Mhm.
It's
Right.
about changing the mindset of the people working on these different tasks and yourself as a leader. Um, so we've specifically worked on like one little task together, solving that one thing, and we're watching that, and then we're trying to apply that to the rest of the company. I think one interesting insight that happened recently. So we had all the executives from TSSC come out recently, do kind of a big update, and one of the main guys pulled me aside for half an hour and sat down and talked with me, and he said one really important lesson that I didn't deeply understand is that in order to change the fundamental culture, I had to change the way I was thinking and about looking at lean.
Mm.
And so I firmly believe in it. I was involved with it. I was out on site on different parts of it. But where I was failing is that I
Mm.
wasn't doing my daily or weekly or biweekly walks to the
Mhm.
factory, the different sites. And the reason that was a fail is because that wasn't, because doing that inspires your other leaders to be doing that same thing, and it goes
Mhm.
down the chain. And so we talked a lot about how it starts with me, and I've got to ask the right questions. I got to
Mhm.
present myself in the right way to make it really clear that as an organization, this is a priority. See change in.
Yeah. Well, and I appreciate you sharing. I mean, I think another good habit that you're demonstrating here, like you did in the episode of My Favorite Mistake, is being willing to share and admit a mistake or a
Yeah.
failure or a gap or something that you were working on. Hopefully, then that flows through and inspires other people to have that same sense of reflection and continuous improvement on their own.
Yeah. If you think you know it all, or if you get in this mindset of like, I can't admit to mistakes, I get why a lot of people go there, because it's hard. It's hard to feel that way. It's hard to admit to where you're at.
Yeah.
But if you're failing at that level, like you've got a deeper level you have to fix first before you can even get to lean, right? Because you've
Right.
got to be
Right.
really honest about where you're at. And the truth is, whenever we start something new, we're always terrible at it. That's human
Right.
nature, right? We're
Right.
born
Right.
that way. We can't
Yeah.
walk, we can't talk, we can't add. And so being comfortable in your own skin that, hey, I am not perfect. Hi, I'm Mike and I have problems is an important first step to seeing real growth and improvement.
Yeah. Well, and I'm sure that's happening. I mean, you talk about wanting to revolutionize the way things are done, trying to be innovative. That's going to lead to trying things that don't work out as you would have thought or would have hoped. Like, how do you help view that as an opportunity for learning as opposed to something that leads to punishment?
Yeah, for me, that starts at orientation, where we actually talk about that very thing. Because one of the scary thing about a culture that focuses on hiring the best is, well, does that mean if I make a mistake, you're just going to let me go?
Ah,
And so we
yeah.
address that very point in orientation and
Oh,
say,
good.
no. Like, think about it for a moment. How do we decide who to hire and to fire? It's their values.
Hmm.
Is there anywhere in our values that say that if you make a mistake, you're going to be fired?
Yeah.
No. No, in fact, it's completely the opposite. We look for people that are challenging the status quo, that are willing to change things. As a result of that, that means you will fail
Yeah.
at trying new things. Failure is not bad. In fact, if you were not failing, I'm a bit concerned that you're not really trying.
Right. Right. Well, but you can see where people, if they've worked in other workplaces,
Yeah.
they may hear of like the best means, the quote unquote, the best means never makes mistakes. But it's great that you address that head on. It seems like you've learned to even anticipate
Yeah.
or bring that up proactively of what that culture means there at Norhart. Um, I want to ask you one other question, just about the approach of working with TSSC. You mentioned earlier what matters is problem solving.
Yeah.
You think of John Shook, formerly of Toyota, loves asking, "What problem do we need to solve?" Like there's that very strong orientation. David Meyer, former Toyota guy who is running his distillery in Kentucky. When I visited him, he said point blank, he's like, "Oh, people visit me and say, why aren't you doing 5S?" And he's like, "No, it's just I'm trying to solve the most important problem that's in front of me in my business. It's all about problem solving." I'm kind of paraphrasing him. So the question is, like, how did they help you frame or scope out or choose the initial problem, like something that was meaningful enough, a good challenge, maybe not too big? Like, I'm just curious, like, how do you decide what the starting point is?
Yeah, first I'll mention just with problems is you're exactly right. In fact, I often tell our team we have 10,000 problems. Problems are not a bad thing. People
Yeah.
see a lot of problems like, dude, I'm failing. That's not the case. The challenge is always to have enough problem solvers to handle the problems as they come in. But if we had no problems, then we're not growing. And I'm not pushing the organization well enough. The way that we decided to move forward with TSSC was we just picked probably one of our biggest bottlenecks in the overall construction
Mm,
chain. And for us at the time, it was framing and wall assembly. And
yeah.
so that was just a very specific window that we could see the most meaningful impact within the organization.
Yeah. Yeah. And that, I mean, that idea of choosing the bottleneck, like there's a time and a place for that. It seems like that strategic focus, while also like in parallel, or once you've developed, some capabilities, as it says on your website, and you've already mentioned 10,000 problems, solving 10,000 little problems. Like how do you help that coexist of, having to be strategic on maybe some of the bigger problems while encouraging people to work on all the small ones?
So we have a team that helps initiate kind of the lean stuff in their organization. They're working on the framing, the wall panels. They're now expanding to a number of other teams to provide support and driving that down. But the energy about solving problems and changing that culture, like that doesn't have to wait for any team to come work with you on. And so one of the things I learned from I'm forgetting the author's name, but the 2 Second Lean book.
Paul Akers.
Paul Akers, yeah.
Yeah.
His one of his insights that was really useful to us was to have the teams make a lean video. So literally every week, all the different teams produce another video of something that they've made their own little improvement within their team on, and they share it off on the team the company wide team meetings, and they have like an NBA bracket, so they're all cheering for each other, and they usually make them a little bit funny, so they're a lot of fun.
Yeah.
It's like a culture building thing as well. But it's really reinforcing every single week. Dude, we actually have to think about ways to improve.
So, I mean, it comes through very clearly, this orientation around mission and purpose and culture and values, all of that being more important than tools. There's so much, and I'll encourage people. I'll put a link on the website. So much great stuff on the Norhart website about culture and what you're growing and what you are, how it's evolving. We did touch on this in My Favorite Mistake podcast, but I want to ask you again for this audience here around the values of transparency, as you describe it, being open, honest, and vulnerable, and sharing employee survey responses out there, not on the intranet, but on the internet, where someone like me, you linked to it. I wasn't spying, like it was there for me to go take a look, and I did. Like, tell us about the thought process of being so transparent.
Yeah, so we share all of our employee survey results openly to the public. You can actually go and look at that on our website. And it's not all pretty, right? It's the good, bad, and the ugly. The comments are all in there. And the reason we do that is because I don't want to be fake good,
Mm-hmm.
right? I think a lot of leaders want to kind of gloss over it and be like, yeah, we're really, really good. Well, that's not what your people say,
Yeah.
right? I'd much rather be honestly bad but working to improve than fake good, just good on the surface. And
Yeah.
so, because being honest is the first step to growth and improvement. And so,
Mm-hmm.
at the every 6 months we do the survey. Every 6 months, that's the first thing that the team hears from me is what my results were, how we did as a company, what steps I'm taking to work to improve the issues that they raised. And I think that's an important iterative, continuous improvement process in order to improve the culture of your company.
Mhm. So how do, like from your role, Mike, as CEO and other leaders that you have in different roles or different levels, how do you help ensure that the honesty is rewarded? Like this comes back to psychological safety, whether it's
Mm.
literally pulling an andon cord in a Toyota factory or whatever mechanism you have for people to speak up and call out a problem. How do you see that part of the culture, flowing from you through other leaders?
I think one of the first things is communication. When I meet with the different teams, I often talk about how my favorite people to work with are the ones that respectfully but nicely call me an idiot, right? Say, hey, dude, they're not actually gonna use those words,
They're
but call me
disagreeing.
out
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
say, hey, you're not doing this right. You're not thinking about that right. If I'm working with someone and they just feel like a yes man to me, and like just nodding, agreeing with everything I say, I don't want to work with them.
Yeah.
Right. So it's almost like I'm creating this environment, this culture, this expectation that if you're just telling me what I want to hear, then you're not going to stick around very long. But if
Right.
you're telling me like how everything's not doing well in a respectful, kind way, and then
Sure.
here's ways that you can improve it and we can get better, dude, I am all game. I am all yours, and I'm excited to be with you.
Yeah.
And so I think it starts with that communication, and I think it then trickles down with the rest of the leadership. We don't always get it perfect. I know another piece of it is taking appropriate action. I remember we had one team that the manager was not lining up to our values. They were not being very respectful and kind to their team. They're very nice to management, so we had no idea. The team were newer team members. They didn't really understand the culture that we were creating. And so they were afraid to come up to upper management about the issues. We
Mhm.
had one employee on that team quit who then shared the insight of what was going on.
Mhm.
And so they quit one day, and literally the next, we got the information. We did a deep dive. So we spent a couple of days interviewing all the different team members, getting the honest feedback of where things were at. We corroborated all the different examples that they gave and found out they were true. And within a couple of days, the bad manager was let go, and they were actually let go before the employee quit.
Mhm.
Right. So it's being very attentive to when people actually raise issues and take action on that so people can know that you mean business when it comes to your values.
Yeah. Well, I guess today, again, Mike Kaeding, the CEO of Norhart. Maybe one other question, Mike, and I feel like, gosh, we're scratching the surface. Maybe we can do another episode, or I can come see you in your
Yeah.
company someday. But you talked earlier, I think it was really inspiring to talk about this notion of wanting to be the best at what you
Mm,
do as a company and individuals. You've got, I think, a lot of time ahead of you as CEO, an opportunity for growth. And like, what does it mean to you to say, well, I'm putting words in your mouth, but it seems like you want to be the best CEO.
yeah.
What does that mean to you? How do you make progress toward that?
But a really high level, my dad died relatively young, and it really makes me realize how short life really is,
Mhm.
right? We only live about 5,000 weeks here on earth. And I think a lot about it, how do I want to spend the minutes I have here on earth? And for me, I want to make some kind of meaningful, positive impact on the world. And so, like, getting a ton of money, like, who cares? They're going to shove $100 bills in your grave. Like, what point is that? Or even being known as a great CEO, like, that is not something I'm striving for either. I'm really striving for what is the impact I can positively make on other people's lives.
Yeah.
And I'm trying to optimize for that. And to do that in a powerful way requires us to become best in the world at what we do.
Mhm.
And so that's the heart and spirit behind trying to become the very, very best.
Well, I appreciate you sharing, some of your story and your openness and willingness to learn
Yeah.
from TSSC and helping everyone else there lead the way. So thank you for spending some minutes out of one of your weeks, here with us. I think it's been enjoyable and meaningful for me and the audience, and Mike, hopefully the same for you.
Yeah. Thanks for having me. This is a lot of fun.
Yeah, well, thank you. Great talking to you again. I hope people will check out the My Favorite Mistake episode. I'll link to that in the show notes. And I'm glad we could have you here as well, Mike. Thank you. Thanks so much.